Here are the 5 most important items to hit in your LOI to buy a business. First, will it be a stock sale or an asset sale? Now, by default, most small business purchases are what's called an asset sale. Now, in an asset sale, like the name implies, you're buying all the assets of the business. But this doesn't just include the physical equipment and inventory. It also includes the customer list, things like IP, every single aspect of the business. You're buying their social media sites, you're buying the whole thing, everything except for their legal entity. Now, in a stock sale, you're buying everything, including their legal entity. And each can come with different forms of liabilities moving to you, the buyer. In an asset sale, you have less of the seller's liabilities. You still can be held for things like payroll taxes or sales taxes, but most other liabilities are going to stay with the seller. Versus in a stock sale, everything is going to transfer to you, the new owner, but then you can work things out in the contract. You can make sure that it comes through debt-free. You can make sure that you're indemnified. It's the thing that you put in the contract to make sure that essentially the liability passes through you back to the seller. There are some ways to essentially make sure that you are doing a stock sale but not taking on much of the seller's liabilities. They also have tax consequences. If you do an asset sale, you get to depreciate the assets you just bought versus a stock sale, you don't. In an asset sale, the seller pays a higher tax rate than in a stock sale. So there's lots of considerations about whether you should do a stock sale or an asset sale. But generally in the SMB space, the default is the asset sale. The times that you'd want to do a stock sale, it's usually if you need to buy a house. So it's easier to get a mortgage if you've bought a company through a stock sale because you have the history of the business to go get that mortgage. Typically, if it's like trucking or transportation, because you want to acquire the DOT number, you also don't want to have to transfer all the titles of the vehicles and pay sales tax on that. Or if it's something that has a lot of contracts that are not going to transfer to you, the new owner, if you do an asset sale, but would transfer if you did a stock sale. Number 2, a little simpler, but the most important, we need to put in the price and the terms of the deal. So of course, you need to say what the total purchase price is going to be. You need to say whether there's going to be any seller financing, whether they're going to roll any equity into the business. You need to say what the term of the seller financing is going to be, what the interest rate is, if there's going to be a standby period, and if there is a standby period, does the note accrue interest during that standby period? Third, we need to define how working capital is going to be treated. By default, in the small business sales space, typically the seller keeps their working capital and the buyer brings in new cash. There might be instances where you need to work something out. Maybe it's a business that requires a lot of working capital. Typically, you get about $500,000 of working capital from the bank. So let's say you can only get a $500,000 loan for working capital, but you need $1 million of working capital, then that's something you'd work out with the seller to get them to leave $500,000. But typically, the way small business deals are done, seller keeps their cash, their working capital, you bring in fresh cash, fresh working capital. And once you get a little bigger, and even here we can blend 4 million and up, you can see more often where working capital is included in the business. There are a couple ways to look at this. You can do what's kind of called a working capital peg, where basically you're going to go through and you're going to look through the financials and figure out, exactly how much cash the business needs to operate. Usually that's actually going to end up a little low number. I think when you come in as a new buyer, you need more working capital than what the existing operator is going to need. So I would say you figure out how much working capital you need, you put that in the working capital peg, but then you as the buyer are still gonna have to bring more cash. Or what's more common is that you just put in a dollar amount. So say you've looked through, we like to just do 3 months expenses. So 3 months expenses are $450,000. You say the deal is gonna include $450,000 of working capital. Number 4, you're gonna need to cover any non-compete or transition services. You wanna make sure that the seller is not going to go out and start a business, right after they sell this to you. Also, the bank's going to want to see a pretty strong non-compete before they're going to be willing to do the loan. And then you also need them to stick around and train you on the sale. So really depending on the business, the most complicated businesses where there's a lot of relationships, they're really reliant on the seller. It's probably going to take a year to transition that. If it's a business that's, pretty simple and you already have pretty strong experience, you might only need a 30-day transition. Number 5, you need to set the due diligence period. Sometimes LOIs, they don't actually define the due diligence period. So basically that's the period where you can back out for any reason at any time. Sometimes contracts just leave that open. The sellers might not go for that. Then typically you set 30 to 45 days of due diligence period where you get to go through and dig in. And if you find anything, we're free to back out and get your escrow deposit back. So if you need help with this, reach out. If you want to buy a business together, you can apply to our partner program.